Welcome to another session of Lectures by Lob-EZ. I'm your host, Donnie Lee. Seems the good doctor has been called to our nation's capital. Seems the president wants his advice and consent on a forthcoming peace treaty between Israel and two of its Arab neighbors, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. Today's topic is the 100 Years' War. Wait a minute. I ain't no math genius, but 1337 and 1453 to that ain't no 100 years. But anyway, I digress. Today's learning objectives. Upon completion of this lesson, students should be able to have knowledge necessary to identify the nations at war during the conflict, explain what led to the outbreak of the war, understand the outcome and significance of the major. These are the notes that Dr. Lob-EZ has left for me. Understand the role of weaponry in the outcome of the war. I don't know about that, but I'll do my best. Thank you for joining me. Here are some of the terms that we will be encountering. 100 Years' War, Aquitaine, Edward III, Parliament of Paris. Holy cow, there's a lot of terms. All right, we're going to do our best. All right, so the 100 Years' War is a conflict that was between two countries, England and France. And evidently, these two countries have had a long history of conflict. Even before the 100 Years' War. So these two countries weren't exactly too friendly with one another. Well, I guess the most important thing that we need to talk about right now is the causes. All right, it seems to me that there's about three particular causes that led to this conflict. And the first of which was the situation where there was some territory right down here. See? Look at this. Oh, what'd I do? Let me go back. So right down in here, there's this territory. It's called the Duchy of Aquitaine. Got that? The Duchy of Aquitaine. Seems that way back in 1152, this here woman, her name is Eleanor of Aquitaine. She was the Duchess. For political reasons, they saw fit to have her married to the King of England, whose name was Henry II. So what that means is that their enemy, the King of England, was also a vassal of the French king. Got that? So anyway, that's sort of a background knowledge or information that you need to have. Okay, so what happens is there's going to be what they call a crisis of secession. Got that? A crisis of secession. All right. So look at this here family tree or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, there was a situation that arose. Okay. So in England or in Europe, the way that, I don't know, heads of state or kings are selected is typically a king passes his throne off to his youngest son, his oldest son. All right. And so this here fella, Philip the Ivy. No, that's the fourth, you big dummy. He had a son whose name was Louis the 10th. All right. Got to learn you some Roman numerals. You got to know those Roman numerals. But anyway, Louis the 10th seems that he didn't secure an heir of his own. He died before that happened. So the way it goes is the throne's going to be passed to his younger brother, Philip V, and same situation. He doesn't have a male heir that he doesn't either have one or it doesn't survive. And then the throne is then passed to the third son, Charles IV. Okay, Charles IV, same situation. He dies without a male heir. And so I guess the only heir left is one of the daughters. Her name is Isabella, and she's Isabella of Aquitaine. Okay, well, turns out that Isabella of Aquitaine is married to the King of England, whose name was Edward II. So they might have allowed Edward II to be a vassal of the French king by, possessing that Duchy of Aquitaine, but they sure is not going to let an Englishman sit on the throne of France. See what I'm saying? So what they're going to do is they're going to try to figure out a way to prevent this here fella Edward II from being the head of state of England, because they's not at this time they're not prepared to allow a woman to be the head of state. Now, she can be the queen, but that's just, her job is to secure an heir. She doesn't have any political power, so that power would go to her husband, as I said, who's the king of England. So those Frenchies don't much like the English, so they're not going to allow their throne to be passed to an Englishman, as I said. So what they did was they figured out a way to pass the throne off to somebody else, okay? And so that's why we go right back up here to Philip IV. And if you look, he's got a brother, all right? And his brother's name is Charles of Valois, okay? And so he's got a son whose name is Philip VI. So that's who they decide. That there fellow right there, he's going to be the new king of France, okay? So that's going to be like Charles' cousin, all right? Or Philip's the fourth nephew, Philip VI. And just so you know, this here family, dynasty, this ruling family of France, they're known as the Capets, all right? Or the Capetian dynasty. So when Charles IV dies, so too does the Capetian dynasty. And we're going to have a new ruling family in France, and them's be the Valois. Got that? All right, so we got a new ruling dynasty in France. They's known as the Valois. All right, and that's not, something that Edward II and his son, Edward III, is going to take too kindly to, right? Because they see themselves as the rightful heirs to the throne of France. Okay? So that's it there, fella, handsome fella, Philip VI, okay? So this is, all of this information here contained on this slide just talks about the legal mumbo jumbo they went through to kind of ensure or make sure that that Englishman ain't going to sit on the throne, okay? So, in order to prevent this kind of situation, this crisis of secession, from taking place anytime in the future, what this here fellow Philip VI did was he seized that territory. Right down here it says, Philip confiscated that duchy in 1337, okay? And so that was Edward's possession, the Duchy of Aquitaine, but not anymore because Philip VI seized it, right? Because they didn't want a situation where an Englishman can claim the French throne anymore. Does that make sense? I think it does. So let's move on. All right. So here's another underlying cause of the 100 Years' War, and that's this here territory called Flanders, okay? So if you look at this map right here, this here is France, okay? And that's northeastern France. Today, we'd call, oh, look at that, Brussels, right? So where's Brussels? Brussels is in the country of Belgium, all right? So Flanders is actually, today, Belgium. Actually, they refer to it as one of the Low Countries because it sits below sea level. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about right now. But what they did was, these here people in Flanders, there was a whole bunch of Flemish weavers. Weavers, you got what I'm saying? They weaved what you call wool in the cloth, all right? And they got that wool from English sheep. And so there was this kind of symbiotic relationship between England and Flanders, where the English would ship over that raw wool, and then them weavers will weave that wool in the cloth. Got that? Do I need to say it again? No, I don't think so. I like to say words that begin with W. All right, anyway. So what happened was the Flemish were encouraged by some of the English to revolt against their landlord or their noble who was loyal to the French crown. And in return, all the English were arrested by the French. And so the English said, to heck with that, and they convinced all them Flemish weavers to flee France and come over to England. All right, so that was something else that just kind of added to the pot to make war, a likely situation. Got that? Those are the three causes of the war. All right, so when we look at it on paper or on a map or whatever you want to call it, it looks as if France should win, okay? Because they're a bigger country, meaning they got a larger population, they're wealthier, and because the war is going to be fought in France, they got home field advantage, all right? So it looks as if France should win, okay? Because England's a little old country, and they're kind of poor, got a small population, but anyway, at least early on, England is going to have the upper hand. Got that? Okay. So let's see. Yeah, this talks a little bit about some of the medieval fighting. Okay, so this here fella here is a knight. Okay, and we know he's a Frenchman because look right here. See these things right here? These are flowers. These are called the fleur-de-lis, the flower of love, y'all. And anyway, that's the symbol of the French crown. So this is a French knight. Okay, and this hero fellow over here, he is a crossbowman. Okay, so that device right there is a weapon. That's a longbow, and it shoots these things called bolts. Pretty much arrows. Now they're a pretty effective and deadly weapon, but they got a effective range of about 50 to 100 yards. The only problem with this here weapon is it takes a real long time to reload. So a crossbowman, he can only shoot 1-2 bolts per minute. All right, because he's got to crank this thing to get that weapon ready to fire again. All right, so the French used some of those guys. They were actually Swiss mercenaries. And then this here fella down here, he is what we call a pikeman. All right, so this big long spear he's got, about 15 feet long, is used to defend against cavalry charges. All right, so these are some of the features that you would see in medieval warfare. So these here fellas, there'd be about 100 of them, see, and then they'd get packed in real tight, and they would be so tightly packed together that if there was a cavalry charge, they would impale them horses and kill all the soldiers and stuff like that. All right, so this was just common medieval warfare. Got that? But the English, they had all that stuff, but they had something else. Okay, and this is kind of like a technological advantage that they brought to them. And then what it is they got this thing called a longbow. See, they call it a longbow because it's long. It's about 6 feet tall. All right, and it's real hard to pull this longbow. They say it takes about 150 pounds of force to pull that bowstring back, and the arrows that they got are real thick. Probably got the circumference or the thickness of your thumb. Okay, so what that means is it can penetrate armor. Even the toughest armor at the time was called plate mail, and if they were close enough, they could penetrate the armor of a knight's breastplate. So that means knight's going to be killed. All right. And at this time, I forgot to mention this just a moment ago, but the knight was sort of like the dominant soldier technology, if you will. These knights were highly trained, and they were pretty much unbeatable. All right, that is until the longbow. So what the longbow does in part is makes the knight or fighting on horseback like that sort of obsolete. Got that? Obsolete. That's a fancy word for meaning it don't work no more. All right. So this here little picture shows the effective range. So it looks like this thing is about 250 yards or 300 meters of accuracy. Okay. So this is a weapon that the English used or introduced onto the field of battle during the 100 Years' War. Okay. And yeah, that's some pikemen. See how they all pack real closely together. All right, you ain't gonna get anybody through there. Okay, gonna get stuck. Something I don't know. Anyway, so another thing that the English introduced was something called the cannon. Okay, they got access through trade to something called gunpowder. Gunpowder come from China. See, but the English got their hands on it, and they fooled around with it, and they came up with a cannon. All right, it was pretty crude and wasn't highly effective, especially early on in the war. Maybe by the end of the war, because it was 100 years or 116, they were able to kind of fine-tune that technology and make a pretty effective weapon out of it. So effective, in fact, that they could lay siege to a castle, and a cannon could bust through a castle wall. So not only was the knight obsolete, so too by the end of the war were castles. All right, and see these fellas here? See what they got in their hands? They got rifles, you see. So this is like the first time rifles or some kind of firearm is used in battle. And like I said earlier, they weren't too effective, but they sure did scare the breeches off them Frenchies. Okay, so like I said, initially it wasn't all that effective, but it sure did scare the French quite a bit. Okay, so there's 3 periods of the war, so we'll go through those. First period starts in 1337. Okay, so right here is the English Channel, see? And this is the body of water that separates England from France, okay? And so what the French were doing is they was laying siege to all these coastal cities here in southern England. And the English didn't really like that, all right? So what they did was they were patrolling the waters here and they encountered an invasion force, okay? And this here battle took place as a naval battle in 1340. It's called the Battle of Sluys. I can't pronounce it very well, but it's got a funny pronunciation and a funny spelling if you ask me. But anyway, the English were successful, and that prevented the Frenchies from launching an invasion into England. And they say that if the French had been successful, they probably would have won the war just right then, because the English wouldn't have been able to defend themselves too well. I don't know, but anyway, what this means is, this battle here, this naval battle, means that the war is going to be fought on French soil, because the French can't invade England because of the English Navy. Got that? All right, moving on. All right, so the first land battle, I guess, and significant battle, was what was called the Battle of Crecy, all right, and that took place in August 1346. And so the King of England, and it was commonplace for the kings to accompany their soldiers. They get dressed up in their armor, and they would ride right along in the battle, and oftentimes they would fight, okay? So the first battle takes place in this northern city called Crecy, all right, and that's where the English invaded under the king, Edward III, okay, August 1346. Got that? All right, so the French outnumbered sort of 30,000 French soldiers to 15,000, so 2 to 1. All right, so it looks as if the French got the numbers advantage. All right, but they didn't really follow any battle plan or anything like that. Not much of a strategy, so they just attacked the English with their cavalry, with their knights on their horses. Okay, expecting that they would just run right over them. All right, but that's not what happened. Why? Well, because of these things, right? The longbow and these things, the cannons. All right, so they fired all these longbows and cannons at the French knights as they was charging at them. And not only that, the English had the high ground. All right, so that meant that the French had a disadvantage. Okay, and so this proved to be enough for the English to overcome that numbers disadvantage they had, and they won. Got that? So the victory, or the Battle of Crecy, went to the English. All right. So, yeah. So that means longbow is going to be an effective weapon, and them silly French aren't going to learn their lesson anytime soon, that they got to change things up. But, you know, they stubborn. All right. Kind of like my daddy. My daddy's kind of stubborn. So, anyway, I can understand that, I guess. Okay. Yeah, it says they secured control over Flanders, the English did. Okay, now the next thing that happened was they captured the city of Calais, okay, which is right up here, right up on the coast, okay, and that was in 1347. But hold on, what else happened in 1347? Because something happened and they just all of a sudden stopped fighting for about 5 or so years. Okay, well, actually it was 7 years. And what was it? What was it that caused them to stop fighting? Well, it was that doggone bubonic plague that we've talked about in an earlier video. So when the bubonic plague hit all of Europe in 1347, they just decided to wait this sucker out, right? And so when the bubonic plague passed, they resumed fighting, all right? And this time, the fighting was led by this feller whose name is Edward the Black Prince, okay? It didn't have anything to do with the color of his skin. It's the fact that his armor was colored black. I guess that was kind of like an intimidation thing, trying to scare his enemies. But anyway, he happened to be the heir to the throne. He was Edward's oldest son. All right. And so what he did was down here in this city called Bordeaux. All right, they got a fancy kind of wine down there called Bordeaux. That's a wine producing region. Anyway, this guy, Edward the Black Prince, along with 2,600 troops, he launched something called a chevauchée. I'm quite certain I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but those French words are doggone hard to say. But anyway, the chevauchée, or whatever blasted way you call this, was basically a scorched earth policy, all right, that they used against the French to try to just destroy as much land as possible, to terrorize the citizenry, okay? And they committed all kinds of acts of atrocity. I mean, just unspeakable things that they did to the civilian population because they wanted to destroy the morale of the French, okay? And they wanted to try to inflict so much damage by burning everything down that it would, more or less kind of bankrupt the French economy. Got that? So he's going all throughout this, part of France, just causing all kinds of ruckus and mayhem, okay? So what's going to happen is the French king is going to be forced to, pursue the Black Prince and kind of put this to an end, all right? So they're going to meet on a field of battle, and that king's name is John II, all right? So the French king's name is John II, okay? And they're going to meet at this battle called Poitiers. I think that's right, 1356, okay? And so they're going to have this big old battle, all right? So this is 10 years after the Battle of Crécy, right there, 1346, 1356, the Battle of Poitiers. And guess what? Like I said, them French hadn't learned their lesson, so they do the exact same thing. They don't change anything up, okay? And neither do the English, because what they had going for them was successful, all right? So like I said, them longbows, all right, 5 to 6 feet long, and them arrows that they shoot, 33 inches long, okay? So almost 3 feet long. So that's a pretty effective weapon. Anyway, the French commanders trying to convince their king, because they got them outnumbered. All right, the French got the English outnumbered like 3-1 this time though. All right, and they try what the French commanders want the king to do is to kind of allow them to take sort of what we call a conservative or cautious approach, and basically use their superior numbers to go ahead and surround the English and then just starve them out. But he says no, he's impatient. What he wants is a quick victory, so he orders them to attack. And guess what? The English got the high ground yet again. And what did the French do? They attack, just like they did 10 years before. And guess what? They lost. All right? By 4 hours into the battle, they had lost. Okay? And they had lost something like 2,000 of their most, prized soldiers, those knights. And in fact, the king himself, John II, is taken prisoner, all right, and Edward, the Black Prince, takes him back to England with them and throws him in the Tower of London for the next 5 years, or 4 years as it was, okay? So during that time, all kinds of chaos and mayhem is unleashed in France because there's no leadership, okay? And so all these mercenaries that were fighting for the king don't really have anything to do and nobody to pay them. So they just go around the countryside looting and pillaging and doing all kinds of unchristian-like things, okay? So eventually they reach terms in what is called the Treaty of that, right there, that word, the Treaty of that word, okay? And so what does this treaty do? Well, it does a couple of things. It gives the English a whole bunch of territory down there in the southern part, like from Aquitaine, it just enlarges their territory there. And then in return, what the English king, the second, wait a minute, that ain't right. That's Edward III. It shouldn't be second. Edward III gives up his claim to the French crown. Got that? All right. So it seems as if, the battle or the war is over, but it's not. Okay? Because it goes on for 100 years, right? Okay. So the French are prideful, just like just about anybody, and they don't want their, a big percentage, probably about 25% of their country, to be in the hands of the English. So what they do is they open up a second phase of the war under a new king, Charles V. All right, the French king Charles V. So what he does is has a different strategy, and instead of, because, I mean, at least they're learning something here. They're not like changing necessarily the way they fight, but they, instead of having these massive battles, they just try to have little skirmishes here and there, because they know that the English have inferior numbers. So the goal is to kind of wear them down and try to kill them slowly. And that's called a war of attrition. We've seen that. There are many examples of that. 30 Years' War and World War II. In fact, the United States faced that in the Vietnam War. They was trying to kill all the Vietnamese, at least the northern Vietnamese, through a war of attrition. Okay. Anyway, second war really, or the second period of war, there's nothing necessarily significant that happens. Both kings die by 1380. Okay, and there's no formal peace treaty, but there is a truce, I guess, a ceasefire for a period of time. Okay, next period, period 3. So, okay. So something happens to convince the new English king, Henry V, to go ahead and attack again, all right? Because he thinks that he's got an advantage now, that he's got an opportunity to defeat the French and take over, all right, and take the throne of France, and that is because these one of these duchies, okay, they're called the Burgundians, all right, Burgundy, decided that they don't want to support the French king no more. And they were kind of in cahoots with the English, and the English basically promised them that if they would support the English, the Burgundians, that they would receive more land, that they would enlarge their duchy. So what they did is they established a treaty, or an alliance with the English. Okay, make sense? All right. And so what happens is the English decide, well, we got the Burgundians on our side. We kind of got the French divided, see? So we're going to attack. And that's exactly what they did. All right. And there was a significant battle that took place in 1450. It's called the Battle of Agincourt. I can pronounce some of these words. All right. And guess what? It's exactly like the Battle of Crécy and the Battle of Poitiers. All right. So, they using them knights again, okay, against them longbowmen. And, of course, the French are defeated. Okay, so now this is the way the peace treaty goes down. Okay, so according to the treaty, Henry V, okay, who is the King of England, he is to marry this girl Catherine, who happens to be the daughter of the French King Charles VI. Got that? And when they have a son, that son would be the heir to the throne, not only of England, but of France. Okay? Well, Charles VI has already got a son. He's already got an heir to the throne, and his name will eventually become Charles VII. And this word here, it looks like dolphin. It's actually Dauphine. And what does that mean? That just means he's a boy king. He's like the heir to the throne. That's just a French term for sort of heir to the throne. But anyway, what that means is this here guy, Charles VII, has got to be disinherited. Got that? All right. So this is the stage for a comeback. All right. The tide of the war is going to change hands. Okay. And this is important because of this here woman. Her name is none other than Joan of Arc, sometimes known as the Maid of Orleans. Okay, so this is quite an interesting tale, all right? So this here woman is a peasant, and it's a remarkable story because she ends up helping save France, okay? So as a young child, she was just a teenager. She only lived to be 19 years old, okay? So when she's just a teenager, she starts hearing these voices, okay? And the voices seem to be, they're telling her that they're saints, okay? Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. And they won't leave her alone. They coming in her room all the time, waking her up. And they keep telling her that she's got to do something for God and for her country, France. And she's like, well, what do you want from me? I'm just a girl. And no disrespect to women at this time, but I mean, women were not in a position to be respected at this time. There was a lot of what they call hatred of women, or just distrust of women, and that's called misogyny. All right, so because of misogyny, she didn't think it was possible that she could make much of a difference. But these saints were persistent, and these voices kept telling her that she's got to save France, and that she's got to help that their Dauphin Charles be crowned the new king of France, and she's got to liberate France of England. She's got to kick out the English. She says, well, I don't know how I'm supposed to do that. So anyway, they convince her that she should go to a neighboring town where there was a French commander there. And she was to go tell the French commander that these saints want him to bring her to the royal court where the Dauphin is, and give her an audience with him and his, advisors, or what they call courtiers. Got that? The king's royal court advisors are called courtiers. All right. So anyway, he's like, get away from me. I don't know. You're just some crazy girl. But she's able to convince him that she's got knowledge of the war. And she's illiterate, right? She doesn't know how to read or write. So it's impossible for her to have any kind of insider's knowledge about the war. But she does. And she's so convincing that this commander goes ahead and dresses her up as a boy, because he doesn't want a woman or word to get out that I guess a woman is going, I don't know. But he dresses her up as a boy, and he takes her to where the Dauphin is in his French court. All right. And he sends word. Okay. So when she arrives, they try to play a trick on her. Okay. Because they think she's just plumb nuts. So what they do is they dress the king up as a courtier, and then one of the courtiers, they dress up as the king because they's trying to trick her. But she's no dummy. So what she does is she comes in and she kneels down before this guy who's dressed up as a courtier and points to him and says, my lord. And everybody is shocked and surprised, okay? And not only that, these here religious figures, this guy, he's a cardinal, okay? And that means he's a high-ranking church figure. He and these other religious theologians give her a test, and they start quizzing her about all these saints and this, that, and the other thing, trying to prove that she's a phony, but they can't, because these saints are giving her the answers, and so as far as they're concerned, she's on the up and up. She's on the level. All right, and so she tells the young boy, king, what she needs to do, and so he allows her to accompany an army to the city of Orleans, okay? Because Orleans, it's a desperate situation. It's a city that is being laid siege to, and it has been for about 6 months by the English, and they're afraid that this city the city walls are going to get breached, and then if the English get control of Orleans, then that's going to give them access to the rest of southern France, and they'll be successful. So, time is of the essence, and so they hurry her, they give her some armor, and they hurry her to the front lines. And once she's there, she's able to convince the French soldiers that in order for them to be successful, they have to be more God-fearing, okay? So she convinces them to take certain sacraments, like confession, like confess their sins to a priest before going into battle, and most importantly, receive the sacrament of Eucharist, meaning they get the communion, okay? So that is enough for them to be successful, and she's a big inspiration, and from that point, it's the turning point, and they start having a series of victories after that, okay? And so everyone begins to see Joan as a heroine, okay? And these victories help her succeed in one of her goals, and that was to crown Charles, the Dauphin, as the rightful king of France. Okay, and so that takes place in 1422. So the English are sure sort of vexed, They're deeply vexed by this. And they got to figure out a way to stop Joan, okay? And so kind of luck bounces into their lap when in a battle, Joan is captured, all right? And she is captured by the allies of the English, and that would be the Burgundians, okay? And the Burgundians actually offered to ransom her to Charles VII, but he turned his nose up and he said, I don't need her help anymore. Can you imagine that? I mean, that's just rude. I mean, here she is. She's the savior of France, and all you got to do is pay a little money to get her ransom, but they refuse to do it. What an ingrate. That's what I say. Well, anyway, so they turned to the English, and the English said, heck yeah, we'll pay her ransom, because they want to prove her a phony, okay? So what they do is they lock her up, and they interrogate her for a period of 10 weeks, and they threaten her with all kinds of bodily harm and torture. And she was a deeply religious girl, and they wouldn't allow her to receive any of those sacraments that I was talking about earlier. So in her weakened state, she admits that she is false, okay? That she really didn't hear these voices. And so what they do is they convict her of witchcraft and heresy. So like being a false prophet, if you will. All right. And so she's found guilty by this religious court that's, led by, I guess some of the English. All right. So what they do is they burn her at the stake. Okay. And she cries out while she's dying and being burned at the stake that she is, she kind of goes back on what she said earlier and says that she truly was, being spoken to by these saints and that she was doing God's will. At any rate, she dies, and she is later canonized as a saint, and she is today the patron, or one of the patron saints of France. This is one heck of a story. All right, so pretty amazing stuff here. So, but we got to move on. All right. So anyway, the tide has turned, and pretty much the English are running out of steam. They've been fighting for a long time, and so the English Parliament is tired of spending all this money and giving all this money that really isn't bearing any fruit. So they put pressure on the English government and the king to kind of wrap this up, and eventually the war comes to a close, okay? So in 1453, the war comes to a close. Got that? And it says the only part of France that was left in English hands was the coastal town of Calais. So all that, and that's all they get. Calais. It's not much. But anyway. All right. So that's all that, some of the things. So let's talk about the aftermath. All right. So France is just, destroyed because the country had been laid waste to. So it's going to take them a long time to recover. But there is something important that you need to know. Okay. And that is this sets in motion a very important change in France, and that is the king, the monarch, begins to consolidate his power, okay? Because one of the reasons why they had so much trouble defeating the English was because the king did not have true sovereignty, meaning power, over his country. And he was too heavily reliant upon his dukes and his nobles and things like that, like the Burgundians who abandoned him in his hour of need. So what the monarch in France decides is that they have to become stronger, okay, and create what's known as a centralized state. And the way that you do that is through raising a permanent standing army, so that the king does not have to rely on his nobles to give him soldiers, okay? So that was one of the biggest changes that takes place in France, that from this point forward, we're going to see a period of time where the French monarch begins to consolidate his power so that their nobles are subordinated. They become subordinate to the monarch. Got that? All right. England, on the other hand, is got a mess on its hands. It's in debt. People are unhappy. The king is not popular because they lost. And so you got all these now soldiers and knights coming back to England, and they're just running amok. Okay, and the English king is just too weak to do anything about it. All right, and throughout the war, in order to get money to fight the war, the king would have to go to Parliament and ask them to like raise taxes or just to give him some money, and in return, he had to like concede certain things, and basically he had to give Parliament more and more power. So France, we see the French monarch getting stronger, but in England, the English monarch's getting weaker as a result of this 100 Years' War. Got that? And in fact, Parliament has a new house that is created. Okay, they already got what's called the House of Lords, and that's all the nobles. But then they developed something else known as the House of Commons. And the House of Commons over time is going to be a very important part of Parliament because they are in charge of the spending. So I have an underline here. They're in charge of the country's purse strings. Does that make sense? Okay, because they had little purses back then where they would put coins in. All right, and a purse was something that everybody carried. It was not something just women carried. Men did too. It was like a little coin purse. All right, so that's just a saying there. Okay, so the problem in England is going to continue. All right, so in 1422, they get themselves a King Henry VI. All right, and this Henry VI is mad, meaning he's crazy, y'all. And he makes some crazy decisions that convinces everybody that he's unstable. All right, and so all of these nobles are becoming more and more disloyal, and the country, England, is descending into chaos. So members of the royal family decide to seize power, okay? But nobody knows who should take power, so a quarrel erupts between two branches of the royal family, okay? And one is known as the Lancasters, and then the other side of the family is known as the Yorks, okay? And so a civil war breaks out in England as a result of the 100 Years' War, called the War of the Roses. And the reason why is because each one of these opposing families of the royal house sort of have a rose as their symbol, or as what do you call it? Like a badge, okay? And so it's the red Lancasters versus the white Yorks. And so it goes back and forth. Now, in a later lesson or video, I'm going to discuss the War of Roses in more detail, okay? Suffice it to say that the war comes to an end when one of the Lancasters, whose name is Henry Tudor, got that? Henry Tudor, is able to defeat the existing king, Richard III, and he is able to take control. Now, in order to bring peace to the country, he marries Elizabeth of York. See that? So you have a Lancaster marrying a York. And so the whole purpose is to bring these two families back together for the purposes of peace. Okay? And this is going to bring to the throne a very important English dynasty known as the Tudors. Okay, so that's Henry VII. And you probably are familiar with his son, Henry VIII. Okay, and Henry VIII had a daughter whose name was Mary, Queen Mary, and she had a nickname known as Bloody Mary. And then he had another daughter who was the head of state. And we'll talk about that. Like England actually has two female heads of state, which is very unique for this time period. And that second daughter, she becomes like one of the most popular and powerful and successful monarchs of all English history, and her name is Elizabeth I. Got that? Anyway, so what this guy Henry VII is able to do is he is able to bring peace and stability, and then eventually he is able to sort of begin the process of consolidating power the same way that the Frenchies had done. Okay, As I said, this will be going into in greater depth at a later time. But yeah, I think that's it, y'all. I'm pretty satisfied. I like that. That flowed pretty well. That was a lot that we had to talk about. But look, we just did it in 45 minutes. I was scared, because I thought this was going to take like an hour and a half, 2 hours or something like that. But I'm quite proud of myself. So I'm going to send word to Dr. Lob-EZ that his cousin Donnie Lee pulled it out, and we had a successful lesson. So thank you for joining me, and we will see you next time.